September 20th, 1958. Harlem department store. Martin Luther King Jr. sat surrounded by admirers, signing copies of Stride Toward Freedom, his first book. The crowd pressed close, smiling faces, outstretched hands, cameras flashing. A well-dressed woman approached. Polite, calm. She asked a simple question. "Are you Martin Luther King?" He confirmed with his characteristic warm smile. She reached into her purse. What emerged was a 7-inch brass letter opener with an ornate handle. One thrust. The blade plunged into his chest, lodging between his fourth and fifth ribs, the tip touching his aorta. The crowd screamed. King froze. Didn't pull the blade. Didn't collapse. Didn't move. Surgeons later said one sneeze could have killed him instantly. But what he said to his attacker weeks later, face to face in a psychiatric ward, made her weep uncontrollably and changed both their lives forever. Why didn't he press charges? Why did the victim visit the woman who tried to murder him? Subscribe, because this story will shatter everything you think you know about forgiveness. Early 1958. Martin Luther King Jr. had become something more than a minister or activist. He'd become a prophet to millions. The Montgomery bus boycott had thrust him onto the national stage, and his message of nonviolent resistance was spreading like wildfire across the segregated South. His first book tour brought him to cities across America, each stop drawing larger crowds. Harlem welcomed him as a returning hero, churches overflowing, streets lined with people hoping to catch a glimpse. But the public saw only the victories. They didn't see the hate mail that arrived daily at his home. They didn't know about the constant death threats, the FBI surveillance, the midnight phone calls promising violence. King accepted this danger as the cost of leadership. He told Coretta repeatedly his faith would protect him, and even if it didn't, the cause was worth dying for. What he believed most deeply was that redemption was possible for anyone, that even the most hardened heart could be transformed by love. September 20th was scheduled to be a simple book signing at Blumstein's department store on 125th Street. Nothing special. Just another afternoon meeting supporters, spreading the message. He had no idea that his assassin was already watching. Isola Ware Curry was 42 years old, born in Georgia, living alone in a cramped Harlem apartment. She had a history of mental illness that had been worsening for years. By 1958, paranoid delusions had completely consumed her mind. She believed that Martin Luther King Jr. was part of a vast communist NAACP conspiracy against her personally. She'd been following his movements for weeks, tracking his schedule through newspaper announcements, standing outside buildings where he appeared. In mid-September, she walked into a stationery shop and purchased a brass letter opener, 7 inches long with an ornate handle. She wrapped it carefully in a handkerchief and began carrying it everywhere. To her fractured mind, this wasn't murder. It was justice. She was exposing an enemy, protecting herself from persecution, doing what needed to be done. On September 20th, she dressed carefully that morning, rehearsed what she would say, checked that the letter opener was secure in her purse. Then she walked calmly toward Blumstein's department store, her surface composure hiding a complete detachment from reality. In her mind, she was a hero. In truth, she was a deeply ill woman about to commit an act that would define both her life and King's in ways neither could imagine. By 3:30 p.m., Hundreds of people had gathered at Bloomstein's department store. The book signing was in full swing. Stacks of Stride Toward Freedom piled high on tables, cameras clicking, conversations humming. King sat at the center, smiling warmly as each person approached. He signed books with personal messages, listened to stories, answered questions, offered encouragement. The atmosphere was joyful, celebratory, safe. There was no security detail. King insisted on being accessible, on meeting people face to face without barriers. Isola Ware Curry entered the store and joined the line. She looked unremarkable, well dressed, calm, polite. Nothing about her appearance suggested danger. She waited patiently as the line moved forward, step by step, closer to the man she believed was her enemy. When she finally reached the front, she looked directly at King and asked in a measured voice, "Are you Martin Luther King?" He met her eyes and smiled. "Yes, I am," he said warmly. Her hand moved to her purse. What happened next? Took less than 3 seconds, but those seconds would echo across decades. The letter opener emerged. Her arm moved in a single, decisive motion. The blade sank deep into King's chest. The 7-inch blade lodged between King's fourth and fifth ribs, the tip coming to rest against his aorta, the main artery carrying blood from his heart. King gasped. His body went rigid, but he didn't scream, didn't try to pull out the blade, didn't collapse. He simply froze, his eyes wide, his breath shallow. The crowd erupted into chaos, screaming, rushing forward, grabbing at Curry. She offered no resistance. Her face remained eerily calm, as if she'd completed a mission. King's eyes met hers for just a moment, and witnesses later said they saw no anger in his expression, only profound sadness. Someone in the crowd reached for the protruding blade. King whispered hoarsely, "Don't pull it." That whisper saved his life. If the blade had been removed, he would have bled out in minutes. Ambulances were called. Police swarmed the scene. King remained frozen in his chair, the brass handle of the letter opener visible above his blood-stained white shirt. Curry was arrested without struggle, repeating fragments of her delusions to officers. And as King was carefully lifted onto a stretcher, the full horror of his situation was only beginning to emerge. Harlem Hospital's emergency room erupted into controlled chaos as King arrived. Doctors had been alerted. A VIP patient, stabbing, victim, blade still embedded. X-rays revealed what everyone feared. The letter opener's tip was pressed directly against King's aorta. One wrong movement, a sneeze, a cough, even a deep breath, could dislodge the blade and trigger catastrophic bleeding. Death would be almost instantaneous. Surgeons prepped for emergency surgery while King lay perfectly still, his remarkable composure holding. Coretta arrived, her face pale as she saw the blade protruding from her husband's chest. The operation lasted 4 hours. Surgeons had to remove a portion of rib to safely extract the weapon, working millimeter by millimeter, their hands steady despite the stakes. Meanwhile, Curry sat in a police station, calm and confused, insisting she'd done the right thing. Psychiatric evaluation was ordered immediately. Time, 0 0.5s. As surgeons finally removed the blood-stained letter opener and began closing King's chest, doctors admitted to each other what they'd been thinking throughout. This man should be dead. His survival depended entirely on his unnatural stillness in those first critical moments, and on pure luck, or perhaps something else entirely. King spent weeks recovering in Harlem Hospital, his movement severely restricted. Letters poured in from around the world, thousands of them expressing relief, offering prayers, celebrating his survival. One letter came from a young white girl in White Plains. She wrote simply, "Dear Dr. King, I read in the paper that if you had sneezed, you would have died. I'm so happy that you didn't sneeze." King would quote this letter in speeches for years afterward, finding in her innocent words a profound meaning about the fragility of life and purpose. While he recovered, Isola Ware Curry underwent psychiatric evaluation. Doctors diagnosed severe paranoid schizophrenia. She was deemed mentally unfit to stand trial. The court committed her to a state psychiatric hospital indefinitely. The public expected King to demand justice, to condemn his attacker, to express outrage. Instead, there was silence. He didn't speak about Curry at all. Not to the press, not to supporters, not even to close advisors who questioned his apparent lack of anger. He focused only on gratitude for his survival and on returning to the work. But privately, he'd begun asking questions. Questions about the woman who'd tried to kill him. 3 weeks into his recovery, King made an unusual request to his doctors. He wanted to know about Isola Ware Curry's condition. What was her mental state? Was she receiving proper treatment? What was her prognosis? His physicians were taken aback, but provided information. Curry was in a state psychiatric hospital, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, isolated and deeply confused. There had been no malice in her actions, they explained. She'd experienced a complete break from reality. King absorbed this quietly. Then he asked if she was receiving adequate help, if anyone was visiting her, if she understood what had happened. The staff had no answers. He sat with this information for several days. Then, he made a request that shocked everyone who heard it. He wanted to visit her. His doctors protested. His wife questioned his judgment. His advisors thought he'd lost his mind. Why would a victim want to see his attacker? Why risk his emotional well-being? Why give her the satisfaction? King's answer was simple but firm. She needs to know she's forgiven. Arrangements were made. Psychiatric staff would supervise. A meeting was scheduled for late October 1958. Both victim and attacker would face each other again. In the days before the meeting, King reflected deeply on his own principles. He'd spent years preaching nonviolent resistance and forgiveness. He'd told thousands of people that hate cannot drive out hate, that only love could do that. But this was different. This wasn't abstract philosophy. It was personal. This woman had plunged a blade into his chest. She'd nearly killed him, left him with a permanent scar and weeks of agony. It would be easy, justifiable even, to hate her, to want punishment, to turn away. He wrote notes about what he might say to her, then discarded them. He decided he would speak from his heart, trust the moment, let his faith guide him. Coretta questioned the wisdom of this meeting one final time. King's response stayed with her. If I can't forgive her, how can I ask anyone else to forgive their enemies? On an October morning, King was transported to the state psychiatric hospital. Curry had been informed a visitor was coming, but not who. Time, 0.5s. When staff told her it was Martin Luther King, she became agitated, confused, frightened. The staff weren't sure how she would react. Neither was King. The psychiatric consultation room was small. Two chairs, pale walls, an observation window where staff could monitor. Curry was brought in first. She sat rigid, suspicious, her eyes darting. When the door opened and Martin Luther King Jr. entered, moving slowly, still healing, she froze. Recognition hit her like a physical blow. She began to cry immediately, her face crumpling. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I tried to kill you." King sat down carefully across from her. He spoke softly, his voice carrying no trace of anger. "I came to tell you that I forgive you." The words seemed to shatter something inside her. 5 years of delusion, of paranoia, of isolated suffering. It all came crashing down. She sobbed uncontrollably. "You should hate me," she gasped between tears. "Everyone hates me." King leaned forward slightly. "I don't hate you," he said. "You were sick. You needed help, not hatred." Her sobs grew louder, years of pain pouring out. He did something then that stunned the watching psychiatrists. He reached out and took her hand and held it. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. King asked about her life, where she was from, what had happened to her, how she'd ended up so alone and afraid. Curry told a fragmented story of abuse, isolation, voices in her head that wouldn't stop. She'd believed everyone was conspiring against her, that she had no allies, that violence was her only option. King listened without judgment, with genuine compassion in his eyes. "You're not evil," he told her quietly. "You were suffering." It was the first time in years that anyone had treated her as fully human. Her psychiatrist, watching through the glass, took furious notes. This encounter was unlike anything in the clinical literature. The victim was counseling his attacker, offering grace where the world offered only condemnation. Over the following weeks, Curry's condition began to improve dramatically. She started accepting her medication, engaged with therapy, kept repeating to staff, "He forgave me. He forgave me." King visited her 2 more times before she was transferred to a better facility. Each time, she wept. Each time, he stayed. Word of the meetings eventually leaked to the press. Reactions were mixed. Some criticized King for what they saw as coddling a would-be assassin. Others saw it as the ultimate embodiment of his philosophy, practicing forgiveness not in the abstract, but in the hardest possible circumstances. King addressed it publicly in a sermon. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. He used the experience to deepen his message, to show that forgiveness wasn't weakness, but strength. Curry's psychiatric treatment continued for years. Her condition improved steadily. She was eventually transferred to a facility with better resources and more humane conditions. King never pressed charges, refused to testify against her, insisted she needed healing, not punishment. Years later, he wrote about the incident. "I learned that suffering can redeem both the sufferer and those who cause the suffering." The brass letter opener was preserved as evidence, later archived in a museum collection. The scar on King's chest remained, a permanent reminder of the day death came within millimeters and mercy followed close behind. Zola Ware Curry spent years in psychiatric care. With proper treatment, her delusions faded. She was eventually released and lived quietly in New York until her death in 2015 at age 98. She never harmed anyone again. Time Hirschwon first Pfaffs. In interviews late in her life, she spoke of King with reverence, gratitude, and deep sorrow. She knew what she'd done, understood the gravity of it, and carried the weight of having nearly killed one of history's great moral leaders. King referenced the stabbing in his final speech in Memphis on April 3, 1968, the night before he was assassinated. "I'm so happy that God allowed me to live through that," he said, connecting his survival to a larger purpose and destiny. The attack had strengthened his resolve, deepened his faith, and given him a story of forgiveness that moved millions. He had practiced what he preached with the woman who tried to murder him. The movement gained profound moral authority from his example. 10 years after surviving Curry's blade, King fell to an assassin's bullet. He survived one, Needham attack. He couldn't survive another. The brass letter opener remains in the collection of the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. It sits in a glass case, 7 inches of ornate metal that should have killed a man but didn't. The label explains, "Weapon used in the 1958 assassination attempt on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr." Thousands of visitors see it every year, read the story, and stand in silence. The object that should symbolize hatred now teaches mercy. Curry's descendants visited the museum once, years after her death. They stood before that case and wept. They left flowers and a handwritten note. "He saved her life with forgiveness. The same blade that pierced King's chest opened her heart to healing." King's words from that hospital meeting echo still. "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that." The letter opener stopped being a weapon the day King chose mercy. It became a witness instead to the truth that sometimes forgiveness is the sharpest blade of all and the most transformative